They flew me in on a twin otter that smelled like diesel and old coffee. The pilot didn't talk much, just handed me a laminated card with radio frequencies and told me to memorize them before we landed. I had 300 miles of white nothing below me and a contract that paid 4 times what I made in a year at the university. My advisor said I was throwing away my career. My landlord said I had 2 weeks before eviction. The choice felt simple. The Amundsen Cock research station sat on the ice like a cluster of rust-colored shipping containers, welded into something that pretended to be permanent. 8 modules connected by enclosed walkways, all of it built on hydraulic stilts that could be adjusted as the ice shifted. The pilot touched down on a groomed strip half a mile from the main structure, and a man in an orange parka drove out to meet us on a tracked vehicle that looked older than I was. Dr. Sarah Chen? He didn't offer his hand. Marcus Webb, station manager, grab your bags. I had 2 duffel bags and a hard shell case with my personal monitoring equipment. Webb loaded them without asking what was inside. The ride back took 11 minutes. I counted. The wind pushed at the vehicle hard enough that I could feel us drift slightly off course. Webb corrected without comment. Inside the airlock, he made me wait while the pressure equalized and the temperature climbed from -40 to something the heaters could manage. He checked a clipboard, made a notation, then led me through to Module A. You're in berth 7. That's the monitoring bay. Your predecessor left his notes in the desk. Read them tonight. Tomorrow, we start your orientation at 0600. You'll shadow me for 3 days. Then you're on your own. He paused at a junction where 3 corridors met. You brought your own laptop? Yes. Good. Don't connect it to station network, ever. Use the isolated terminal in the monitoring bay for all data access. The subnet is air-gapped for a reason. What reason? He looked at me for the first time since we'd entered. His eyes were the color of pack ice. The signal does things to networked systems, feedback loops. Your orientation covers it. For now, just don't plug your personal machine into anything here. Berth 7 was smaller than my college dorm room. A bed bolted to the wall. A desk with a locked drawer. A locker with a combination lock already set to the code for my contract paperwork. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and something else. Something that reminded me of burnt electronics. On the desk sat a spiral notebook with a blue cover, worn soft at the edges. Webb pointed at it. Peterson's logs. He kept good records. You'll want to read all of it before your first solo shift. Where's Peterson now? Medical evacuation 3 weeks ago. He's fine. Just needed some time away. Webb's tone suggested I shouldn't ask follow-up questions. Dinner is at 1800 in the galley, Module C. Don't be late. We eat together here. It's not optional. He left me there. I heard his boots echo down the corridor, then the hiss of a pressure door sealing. I opened Peterson's notebook. The first page was dated 11 months prior. Peterson's handwriting was small and precise, each letter carefully formed. He'd started with logistics, berthing assignments, radio channels, meal schedules, the location of emergency supplies. On page 3, he'd written a single sentence in red ink. Read the full orientation packet before you judge any of this as paranoia. I kept reading. Page 7 began the rules. Peterson had numbered them carefully, leaving space between each one as if he expected to add more later. I counted 14 items on the initial list. 1. Monitor duty runs from 2200 hours to 0600. You will be alone in Module F during this time. The security door locks automatically at 2200 and will not open until 0600 unless you use the emergency override. Do not use the override unless you are following emergency protocols. 2. The signal source is located 2.3 kilometers beneath the ice sheet, bearing 217 degrees from Module F. At 0100 hours each night, the signal increases in strength. This is normal. Do not adjust the monitoring equipment during this time. 3. Between 0100 and 0115, you may hear sounds in the ventilation system. These sounds will seem to move from the north vents to the south vents. Do not investigate. Do not call maintenance. The sounds will stop at 0115. 4. If the acoustic monitor shows a secondary signal source at a different depth, note the time and bearing in the log. Do not attempt to isolate or enhance this signal. Report it at the morning briefing. 5. The emergency radio is set to channel 7. Do not change this. If you need to contact the main modules, use channel 7 only. If someone contacts you on a different channel, do not respond. Note the time and channel in the log. 6. At 0200 hours, the lights in the monitoring bay will flicker. This lasts between 30 and 40 seconds. Do not leave your chair during this time. Do not touch any equipment. When the flickering stops, verify all monitors are displaying correctly. If any screen shows solid blue, follow power cycle protocols. 7. You will see your reflection in the observation window. This is normal. If your reflection moves when you are not moving, do not look at it directly. Continue your work. It will stop after several minutes. 8. Do not open the exterior door to the drill access shaft. It is locked and alarmed. If the alarm sounds, immediately radio channel 7 and report the time. Do not approach the door. 9. Between 0300 and 0330, maintain radio silence unless reporting an emergency. During this window, you may hear voices on channel 7. These are not real transmissions. Do not respond. If we must verify radio function, test the emergency beacon using the green button only. 10. The temperature in Module F should remain between 15 and 18 degrees Celsius. If the temperature drops below 10 degrees, follow cold weather protocols immediately. If the temperature rises above 25 degrees, evacuate Module F using the security door and report to Module A. 11. You are required to log temperature, signal strength, and equipment status every 30 minutes. Use the printed log sheets. Do not miss a logging interval. If you are interrupted during logging, complete the current entry before addressing the interruption. 12. At 0430, you will perform an equipment check. This requires you to walk to each monitoring station and verify the indicator lights. Walk clockwise around the room. Do not walk counterclockwise. If you forget and begin walking counterclockwise, return immediately to your desk and begin again. 13. Food and water are stored in the supply cabinet. You may eat during your shift, but you must remain in the monitoring bay. Do not go to the galley. Do not go to your berth. If you feel unwell, radio channel 7 before taking any action. 14. At 0545, begin your end of shift checklist. This must be completed before 0600. Lock all printouts in the secure drawer. Leave a clean desk for the next shift. When you exit at 0600, verify the security door locks behind you. If it does not lock, radio channel 7 immediately. Below the numbered list, Peterson had added a note in different ink, the letters slightly shakier. These rules were developed over 18 months of continuous monitoring. They are not arbitrary. Each one exists because something happened that required a response. Follow them exactly. Do not experiment. Do not skip steps. Do not convince yourself you know better. I sat on the edge of the bed and read through the list 3 more times. Some of the rules felt reasonable, standard procedures for sensitive equipment or isolated work. Others felt like superstition dressed up as protocol. The reflection in the window, the specific walking direction, the radio silence window. But Peterson had written it all in the same careful handwriting, giving equal weight to temperature monitoring and whatever the hell Rule 7 was supposed to mean. I flipped through the rest of the notebook. Peterson had logged every shift for 11 months. Each entry followed the same format: date, time, signal strength, temperature, notable events. Most nights, he'd written no anomalies in the events column. But every few pages, there were other entries. 0112. Ventilation sounds louder than previous nights. Stopped at 0114. 0247. Heard footsteps in the drill access corridor. No one on station is awake. Sound stopped after 3 minutes. 0309. Voice on channel 7 spoke my name. Did not respond. Logged the time. 0432. Began equipment check walking counterclockwise. Realized error after 4 steps. Returned to desk. Felt watched during correct clockwise check. Completed without incident. The entries went on. Some shifts had multiple events. Others were quiet. But Peterson's handwriting never changed, never showed panic or fear. Just careful documentation, like he was recording rainfall data or seismic readings. The last entry was dated 22 days ago. 0351. Secondary signal source detected at 3.7 kilometers depth, bearing 215 degrees. Signal strength increasing rapidly. Following Rule 4, logged but did not isolate. At 0354, signal source appeared to move to 2.9 kilometers depth. This is not consistent with any geological process. Signal continued to move, approaching station depth. At 0402, requested emergency evacuation. Dr. Webb arrived at 0415. Signal source had returned to baseline depth by 0430. Webb ordered me to medical for evaluation. This is my final entry. That was where the notebook ended. I closed it and set it on the desk. My hands were steady. I wasn't sure why I'd expected them to shake. The dinner bell rang at 17:55. I found my way to Module C by following the color-coded stripes painted on the corridor walls. Blue meant life support, red meant emergency routes, green meant common areas. The galley was larger than I'd expected, with seating for 20, though only 7 people sat at the long table when I arrived. Webb sat at the head. He gestured to an empty chair. "Everyone, this is Dr. Chen. She's taking over monitoring duties. Chen, this is the station crew." He went around the table. Dr. Raj Deshmukh, geophysicist. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, atmospheric scientist. Marcus Webb himself, station manager. James Kowalski, maintenance engineer. Dr. Elena Volkov, glaciologist. Thomas Reeves, communications technician. Dr. Henry Okonkwo, the team's medical officer and secondary geologist. They nodded, but didn't offer handshakes. The food was already on the table, something that looked like chicken and rice, probably rehydrated from the supply cache. We ate in near silence for the first 10 minutes. Then Volkov spoke. "You read Peterson's notes?" "Some of them, the rules list. And," I chose my words carefully, "they're very specific." Webb cut in. "Peterson kept this station running smoothly for 11 months. He documented everything. You'll follow his procedures exactly until I tell you otherwise." "What happened to him?" "He requested medical leave. We granted it." Webb's tone made it clear the topic was closed. Reeves, the communications tech, poured himself more water. The signal's been stronger this week. You'll see it tonight when you shadow Dr. Okonkwo. I looked at Okonkwo. He was a big man with graying hair and calm eyes. He nodded. I've been covering Peterson's shifts since he left. You'll observe tonight, then we'll split shifts for the next 2 nights while you get comfortable with the equipment. What exactly is the signal? Deshmukh answered. We don't know. It's electromagnetic, centered in the VLF range, but with harmonics that extend into ELF and SLF bands. It's not natural. The pattern is too regular. But it's not any human transmission we can identify. How long has it been broadcasting? We detected it 4 years ago during a routine survey. That's why this station exists. We're here to study it. Tanaka added. It pulses every 11 seconds, never varies by more than 0.3 seconds. The strength fluctuates on a daily cycle, peaking at 0100 local time. Why that time? No one answered. Webb stood. You'll learn the rest during orientation. For now, finish eating. 2100, you'll meet Okonkwo in Module F. Watch everything he does. Ask questions tomorrow. Tonight you just observe. The meal ended. I helped clear the table, following Volkov's lead on where to stack dishes and where to leave the compost. Everyone dispersed to their own modules. I went back to berth 7 and tried to unpack, but my hands kept reaching for Peterson's notebook instead. I read more entries. Peterson had been methodical about recording his observations, but between the lines, I could sense something else. A growing tension. The entries from his first month were brief, factual. By month 6, they'd become longer, more detailed. He'd started noting things that weren't anomalies, but weren't quite normal either. The way frost patterns formed on the observation window. The precise rhythm of the ventilation system. The feeling of the room at different times of night. By month 10, he'd begun adding addendums to the rules. Small refinements, clarifications. At 2000, I changed into the thermal layers Kowalski had left in my locker and headed for Module F. The monitoring bay was exactly as Peterson had described it. A rectangular room, 7 meters by 9. 5 monitoring stations arranged in a rough semicircle, each with multiple screens showing waveforms, spectral analyses, and scrolling data feeds. The observation window dominated the north wall, looking out onto ice and darkness. Emergency supplies in a locked cabinet. The security door I'd entered through. And on the east wall, a heavy door marked Drill Access, Authorized Personnel Only, with a red alarm housing above it. Okonkwo was already at the main station, logging something in a printed spreadsheet. He glanced up when I entered. Right on time, good. Punctuality matters here. He gestured to a chair beside him. Sit, watch. Save questions for the morning, unless something urgent comes up. I sat. The chair was worn, the padding compressed in the exact shape of someone who'd spent many hours in that spot. Peterson's shape. The clock on the wall read 2107. Okonkwo walked me through the basics. Primary, signal monitor, secondary array, acoustic sensors, temperature probes, seismic monitors. Everything was hardwired, no wireless connections. Data flowed through shielded cables to isolated servers in the basement of Module A. Twice daily, Webb or Deshmukh would review the data logs. The night shift monitor's job was to watch for anomalies and maintain the equipment. At 2200, I'll lock the security door. You'll see me test it from inside. Then we settle in for the night. He checked his watch. First logging interval is at 22:30. Every 30 minutes after that. until 0600, temperature, signal strength, equipment status. Use the printed sheets. Write clearly. Why printed? Why not digital logs? Digital logs can be altered. These sheets go into the secure drawer and get reviewed at the morning briefing. Paper doesn't lie. At 2200 exactly, he walked to the security door and pressed the lock button. A red light appeared above the frame. He tested the handle. It didn't move. Locked. Note the time in the security log. He pointed to a separate clipboard hanging by the door. I watched as he wrote, 22 security door locked, tested secure, HO, in neat script. The room felt different with the door locked, smaller, more isolated. Through the observation window, I could see nothing but darkness and the faint reflection of the monitoring equipment behind us. We sat. Okonkwo showed me how to read the signal displays, how to identify baseline versus anomaly, how to check the equipment status lights. At 2230, he walked me through the logging process. Temperature, 16.4 degrees. Primary signal strength, minus 42 decibels. Secondary array, all channels nominal. He handed me the pen. You write the next one, 2300. The 30 minutes passed slowly. I watched the waveforms scroll across the screens, hypnotic and regular. The signal pulsed every 11 seconds, just as Tanaka had said. Each pulse was identical to the last, a sharp spike followed by a decay pattern that looked almost biological in its rhythm. At 2300, I completed my first log entry. My handwriting looked sloppy next to Okonkwo's precision, but I got all the numbers right. The ventilation system hummed steadily. The temperature held stable. Nothing happened. At 2330, Okonkwo logged again. At midnight, I did. You're doing fine, he said. Most of the night is like this. Boring, routine. The rules exist for the parts that aren't. When does it get not boring? Oh, 100 is when things change. You'll see. At 00:45, he stood and stretched. Going to make coffee. You want any? Sure. He moved to the small counter by the supply cabinet, where a coffee maker sat beside a water dispenser. While his back was turned, I studied my reflection in the observation window. It looked normal. Same face, same thermal layers, same ponytail pulled back from my forehead. The reflection stared back at me with the same neutral expression I was wearing. Okonkwo brought 2 mugs. Sugar's in the cabinet if you want it. We drank. The coffee was terrible, bitter, and thin. I didn't complain. At 0100 exactly, the primary signal monitor changed. The amplitude increased by a factor of 3 over the course of 10 seconds. The waveform stayed regular, but stronger, more present. I felt it somehow, a pressure in my sinuses that hadn't been there before. There it is, Okonkwo said quietly. The nightly surge. Watch the secondary array. The secondary monitors showed a ripple effect, like the signal was propagating outward from the source. Then at 0103, I heard it. A sound in the ventilation, distant, metallic. Like something was moving through the ductwork. It started from the north side of the room and slowly, steadily, traveled south. I looked at Okonkwo. He was writing in the log, completely calm. The sound continued. It didn't sound like air movement or mechanical settling. It sounded like something was crawling through the vents, section by section, heading toward the south wall. At 0114, it stopped. Okonkwo finished his log entry. Rule 3. Every night at 0100, don't investigate, don't call maintenance, don't worry about it. It stops at 0115, give or take a minute. What causes it? Don't know. Thermal expansion in the ductwork, maybe. Resonance from the signal, possibly. Could be a dozen things. We've learned it's not harmful, so we don't waste time on it. I wrote my next log entry at 0130. My hand was steadier than I'd expected. The signal had dropped back to baseline levels. The pressure in my sinuses faded. At 0200, the lights flickered. I'd been staring at the primary monitor when it happened. The fluorescent tubes overhead stuttered, dimmed, brightened again in rapid succession. The monitors flickered too, their screens wavering. I felt Okonkwo's hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. Stay seated. Don't touch anything. The flickering continued for 38 seconds. I counted. Then it stopped, and everything returned to normal. Okonkwo released my shoulder and moved to check the monitors. Primary display, status. I looked. Nominal. Secondary array. All green. Acoustic monitors. Green. Good. Log it. He pointed to the sheet. 0200. Power fluctuation per Rule 6. Duration 38 seconds. All systems verified nominal after event. I wrote it down. The rest of the night continued in the same pattern. Every 30 minutes, we logged. At 0300, Okonkwo tapped my arm and pointed to the radio. A voice was coming through on channel 7, faint and distorted. It sounded like Webb, but the words were wrong, jumbled. Confirm status, basement, 13 minutes. Okonkwo turned down the volume but didn't respond. We sat in silence until 0330, when he turned it back up and did a beacon test. The green light flashed. The radio was working correctly. Rule 9, he said. You'll hear things during the radio silence window. They're not real. No one's transmitting. Don't respond. At 0430, he stood. Equipment check. Watch my path. He walked to the leftmost monitor station and checked the indicator lights. Then to the next station, moving clockwise around the room. He checked each one methodically, calling out the status. Primary green, secondary array green, acoustic green, seismic green, environmental green. When he returned to his chair, he logged the check. Your turn tomorrow night. Remember, clockwise only. The clock reached 0545. Okonkwo began the end-of-shift checklist, talking me through each step. Lock the printouts in the secure drawer. Clear the desk. Verify all monitors are set to standby mode. Place the pens in the drawer. Close the log binder. At 0600 exactly, he unlocked the security door and tested it. The lock disengaged smoothly. He noted it in the security log. 0600, security door unlocked, shift complete, HO. We stepped out into the corridor. Behind us, the monitoring bay sat empty and quiet, the screens glowing softly in the darkness. You'll take the first half of tomorrow night, Okonkwo said. 2200 to 0200. I'll relieve you then and finish the shift. Wednesday night, you'll do 0200 to 0600 while I cover the start. Thursday, you're on your own. What if something happens that's not in the rules? He looked at me with those calm eyes. Follow the closest applicable rule. Use your judgment. Don't panic. And radio channel 7 if you're truly unsure. Someone's always listening on channel 7. We walked back to Module A together. The sun was starting to show at the horizon, a pale glow that barely qualified as dawn. Inside, the station was warming up, the heaters cycling on as people began to wake. I went to my berth and lay down without undressing. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless. Webb's orientation started at 1400 hours in Module A's briefing room. He'd laid out folders, equipment manuals, and a 3-ring binder labeled Station Protocols, Current. You survived your first night. Good. He opened the binder. Now we talk about why the rules exist. For the next 3 hours, he walked me through the history of the station. The signal had been discovered during a routine ice-penetrating radar survey in 2021. Initial analysis suggested it was artificial, or at least not naturally occurring. The frequency pattern didn't match any known geological or atmospheric phenomenon. It didn't match any military or civilian transmission. It was just there, 2.3 kilometers down, pulsing every 11 seconds. The first research team arrived in summer 2022. They set up temporary monitoring equipment and confirmed the signal. They also discovered the daily strength cycle, peaking at 0100 local time. By winter 2022, they'd built the first permanent module and started continuous observation. That's when the problems began. The signal affects electronics, Webb said. Not consistently, not predictably, but enough that we've had to develop procedures. The first team lost 3 laptops to corrupted hard drives. One researcher's personal phone started displaying random GPS coordinates, all of them pointing to the signal source. We had a radio that would only transmit on one frequency, no matter what channel we selected. So you air gap everything. Correct. Isolated systems only. No network connections. No personal devices on station systems. Everything runs through hardwired, shielded connections. What about the other rules? The ventilation sounds, the light flickering. Webb leaned back in his chair. Those developed over time. The first winter team noticed the ventilation noises. They investigated, found nothing. The sounds kept happening, same time every night. Eventually, they stopped investigating and just logged it. Same with the lights. Same with the radio anomalies during the 0300 window. But the reflection rule, the walking direction. He was quiet for a moment. Peterson added those. He noticed patterns that concerned him. He documented them, tested them, and developed responses. I reviewed his methodology. It was sound. What kind of patterns? The reflection moving independently happened twice. Once to Peterson, once to the researcher before him, Dr. Amundsen. Both times during periods of high signal strength. Both times the phenomenon stopped when they avoided looking directly at the window. Peterson made it a rule, seemed prudent. And the walking direction. Peterson walked counterclockwise during an equipment check. He reported feeling disoriented afterward, like the room's geometry was wrong. It took him 20 minutes to feel normal again. He tested it 3 more times, carefully. Same results every time. He made it a rule to walk clockwise only. Again, seemed prudent. I absorbed this. So the rules are basically documented trial and error. Yes, each one exists because something happened. We learn to prevent or manage that something through specific procedures. That's what you're doing down here, refining our understanding of what works. He showed me the equipment maintenance schedules, the supply inventory system, the emergency protocols. There were procedures for everything: power loss, heating failure, communications failure, medical emergency. Each one was specific, tested, documented. At 16:30, he checked his watch. That's enough for today. Rest before your shift tonight. You'll want to be alert. I spent the time before dinner reading more of Peterson's notebook. His entries from month 7 caught my attention. 2:34. Saw movement outside the observation window. Appeared to be a figure standing approximately 20 meters from the module. Visibility poor due to darkness and blowing snow. Figure remained stationary for 3 minutes, then moved out of sight toward the drill access structure. Did not investigate per general safety protocols. No evidence of anyone leaving the main modules. Mentioned to Webb at morning briefing. He will review security logs. 2 days later, 0241, figure outside window again, closer this time, maybe 15 meters. Stood facing the window, could not make out details, watched for 5 minutes. Figure raised one arm as if waving. Did not respond. Figure lowered arm and moved away. Webb says security logs show no one left the modules. Exterior cameras show nothing. The entries continued sporadically. Peterson saw the figure 9 more times over the next 4 months. Sometimes it was distant, sometimes close. Sometimes it was stationary. Sometimes it moved along the exterior of the module. He never saw a face. He never saw clear details. Just a shape in the darkness, roughly human. He never added it to the rules list. I wondered why. Dinner was quieter than the previous night. Kowalski mentioned that the water reclamation system needed maintenance. Tanaka reported unusual atmospheric readings. Nothing dangerous, just odd. Deshmukh said the seismic monitors were showing microtremors deeper than usual. Normal station talk. Routine problems. At 21:45, I suited up in thermal layers and headed to Module F. Okonkwo was already there, running through pre-shift checks. "You're early. Good habit. Help me verify the equipment." We went through each monitor station together. He showed me how to check the connections, verify the calibration, test the redundancy systems. At 2200, I locked the security door while he watched. I tested the handle. Solid. I logged it. "Your watch until 0200, he said. "I'll be in the break room in Module A. Radio if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll see you at 0200 sharp." What if something happens that's not in the rules? Then you use your judgment, stay calm, and document everything. The rules cover 99% of situations. For the other 1%, do what seems safest and write it down. He left. The security door closed behind him. The lock engaged. I was alone. The first hour passed smoothly. I logged at 2230 and 2300. The signal held steady. The temperature was 16.6 degrees. The equipment status lights were all green. At 2330, I made coffee. It tasted just as bad as the previous night. I drank it anyway. Midnight came. I logged. The signal pulsed, regular as a heartbeat. At 0045, I noticed frost forming on the observation window. Not unusual. The exterior temperature was minus 38 degrees, according to the environmental monitor. But the frost pattern was strange. Instead of forming in random crystals, it was making branching lines that almost looked deliberate, like someone was drawing on the glass from outside. I watched the pattern grow. It spread from the bottom left corner, extending upward, and to the right in thin, delicate lines. Within 10 minutes, it covered half the window. The pattern looked like a tree, or like blood vessels, or like lightning captured mid-strike. I logged it in the notable events column. 0055, frost pattern on observation window, unusual branching formation. At 0100, the signal surged right on schedule. The pressure built in my sinuses. I watched the monitors spike and settle into their elevated pattern. At 0104, the ventilation sounds started. They were louder than the previous night, more distinct. I could track them moving through the ductwork, north to south, steady and purposeful. They sounded less like settling metal and more like something dragging itself through a confined space. I stayed in my chair. I didn't call maintenance. I watched the clock. The sounds reached the south wall. They stopped. But they didn't stop at 01:15. They kept going for another minute, fading gradually until they were gone at 01:16. I logged it. 0100, signal surge nominal. 0104 to 0116, ventilation sounds per Rule 3, duration longer than typical. At 0130, I did my regular logging. Signal strength was dropping back toward baseline. The frost on the window had stopped growing. At 0200 exactly, the lights flickered. I kept my hands on the desk, away from the equipment. The fluorescent tubes stuttered and dimmed. The monitors wavered. Through the flickering, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the observation window. It was facing away from me. I was looking straight ahead at the monitors, but my reflection was turned to the side, as if it was looking at something else in the room. I kept my eyes on the monitors, didn't turn my head, didn't react. The flickering continued for 41 seconds. When it stopped, I checked each monitor as Okonkwo had taught me. All green, all nominal. I didn't look at the window until I'd logged the event. When I finally glanced up, my reflection was normal again, facing the same direction I was facing. Rule 7. Don't look at it directly if it moves wrong. It will stop after several minutes. I'd followed the rule without thinking about it. At 0200 exactly, Okonkwo knocked once on the security door. I unlocked it and let him in. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. How was it? Routine. One longer duration on the ventilation sounds. The usual light flicker. I logged everything. He checked the log sheets, reading carefully. Good documentation. The frost pattern is interesting. I'll mention it at briefing. He looked at me again. You okay? Fine. Tired, but fine. Go rest. See you tomorrow night for the back half of the shift. I walked back to Module A under a sky that was starting to brighten. The sun wouldn't rise properly for another 2 hours, but the horizon was showing color. Now, deep blues fading to gray. In my berth, I tried to sleep, but I kept seeing my reflection's wrong angle, the way it had been turned, as if watching something I couldn't see. I forced myself to close my eyes. Sleep eventually came. The next night, I arrived at 21:30. Okonkwo was already logging the pre-shift equipment check. You'll take 0200 to 0600 tonight, the back half of the shift. That's where the interesting events cluster. Why? Don't know, but Peterson's logs show more anomalies between 0200 and 0500 than any other period. Could be the signal strength patterns, could be observer fatigue, could be something else. He showed me the schedule. I'll get you settled, then head out at 0200 when you take over. We ran through the shift start procedures together. At 2200, he locked the security door. At 2230, we logged. The routine was becoming familiar now, the rhythm of it settling into my awareness. At 0100, the signal surged. At 0105, the ventilation sounds began, north to south, ending at 0114. At 0200, the lights flickered. 39 seconds. All systems verified green. Okonkwo stood and stretched. Your watch. I'll be in Module A if you need me. Remember Rule 9. Maintain radio silence from 0300 to 0330. And Rule 12. Walk clockwise for the 0430 equipment check. I remember. He unlocked the security door, stepped through, and was gone. I locked it behind him and logged the handoff. 0200, shift transfer. SC assumes watch. The monitoring bay felt larger when I was alone. The hum of the equipment seemed louder. I did my 0230 logging and settled in to watch the monitors. At 02:43, I saw movement outside the window. Just a shift in the darkness, a change in the texture of the night. I looked up from the monitors. Through the observation window, beyond the frost patterns that still marked the glass, something was moving. A figure, roughly human-shaped, walking slowly from left to right across my field of view. I watched it. The figure was dark against dark, visible only because it was slightly darker than the surrounding ice, or maybe because it was closer. I couldn't tell how far away it was, 20 meters, 50. The darkness made distance impossible to judge. The figure stopped. It stood there, facing the window, facing me. I stayed in my chair. I didn't approach the window. I didn't call out on the radio. Peterson had seen this 9 times and never made it a rule. That suggested it wasn't dangerous, just present. The figure raised one arm, a slow gesture, deliberate. It held the arm up for 5 seconds, then lowered it. I didn't respond. I watched. The figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the module's exterior lights. I logged it. 02:43. Figure, observed outside observation window, approximately 20 to 30 meters distance. No details visible. Figure moved away after 2 minutes. No apparent threat. My hands were steady as I wrote. My heart rate was elevated, but not racing. I was afraid, but it was a managed fear, the kind you could work with. At 0300, I turned down the radio volume for the silence window. Almost immediately, voices started coming through Channel 7. They were clearer tonight than they had been when Okonkwo was here. Chen, monitoring bay, respond. It sounded like Webb's voice, urgent, strained. Something wrong. Check the drill access, immediately. I didn't respond. I watched the radio, watched the voices continue for another minute, then fade into static. The red transmission light never illuminated. No one was actually broadcasting. Rule 9, not real transmissions. Don't respond. At 0330, I turned the volume back up and tested the emergency beacon. Green light. The radio was functioning correctly. I logged at 0330 and 0400. The signal held steady. Temperature was 16.2 degrees. All systems green. At 0430, I stood for the equipment check. I started at the leftmost monitor station, the primary signal display. Green lights. I moved clockwise to the secondary array. Green, acoustic monitors. Green, seismic. Green, environmental. Green. As I walked, I felt the room around me. The space seemed stable, the angles correct, the distance between stations consistent. Nothing like what Peterson had described when he'd walked counterclockwise. I completed the circuit and returned to my chair. Logged the check. At 0500, I logged again. At 0530, again. The night was winding down now, the worst of it passed. At 0545, I began the end-of-shift checklist. Lock printouts in the secure drawer. Clear the desk. Set all monitors to standby. Place pens in drawer. Close the log binder. At 0600 exactly, I unlocked the security door and tested it. Smooth operation. I logged it and stepped out into the corridor. Okonkwo was waiting outside. How was the back half? Saw the figure outside, like Peterson described in his notes. He nodded slowly. It appears sometimes. We don't know what it is. Could be ice formation casting shadows. Could be equipment reflection playing tricks. Could be something else. As long as it stays outside, we don't worry about it. Has it ever tried to come inside? No. It appears, it watches, it leaves, That's all. We walked back to Module A together. I asked him, "Tomorrow night I'm solo. Anything else I should know?" "You've seen the main patterns now. Trust the rules, trust your training, document everything. If something happens that truly scares you, radio for backup. But don't radio just because you're nervous. Nervous is normal down here." In my berth, I tried to sleep but couldn't immediately. I kept seeing that figure, the way it had raised its arm. Not threatening, just acknowledging. Like it knew I was watching and wanted me to know it was watching back. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I woke at 1300 to find a note slipped under my door. Webb's handwriting. "Briefing at 1500. Your frost pattern observation was useful. Bring Peterson's notebook." The briefing room held Webb, Deschmuch, and Volkov when I arrived. Webb pointed to a chair. "The frost pattern you logged," he said, without preamble. "Describe it again." I did. The branching lines, the way they'd spread across the window, the tree-like or vascular appearance. Deschmuch pulled up a file on his laptop. "We've seen similar patterns before, 3 times in the past 18 months. Always on nights when the signal strength exceeds a certain threshold during the 0100 surge." He showed me photos. The frost patterns were nearly identical to what I'd observed. Delicate, branching, organized. "What causes it?" I asked. "We don't know. The temperature differential alone shouldn't create such regular patterns. We think it might be related to the signal somehow affecting the molecular structure of the ice formation, but that's speculation." Volkov spoke up. "More concerning is the correlation. Each time we've observed these patterns, we've had an equipment anomaly within the next 3 nights." "What kind of anomaly?" Webb answered. "Monitors displaying incorrect data, radio failures, temperature sensor glitches. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to disrupt operations. Peterson observed the frost pattern 8 days before his final incident." I felt cold. "Should I be worried about my shift tonight?" "No, just aware. We'll have a conquo on standby in Module A. If anything unusual happens beyond the documented rules, radio immediately. Don't wait, don't troubleshoot, just call." "Is there anything else I should watch for?" Deschmuch and Volkov exchanged a glance. Webb caught it. "Tell her," he said. Volkov hesitated, then spoke. "The secondary signal sources. Rule 4 says to note them, but not isolate them. Peterson's last shift, he logged a secondary source that appeared to move vertically through the ice. That's not possible. Signal sources don't move. They're fixed by their physical location. Unless the source itself is moving," I said. "Exactly. Which suggests the signal isn't geological. It's something else. Something that can move. Or something that exists at multiple depths simultaneously, appearing to move as different components activate. We don't know. That's why you don't isolate it. Trying to track it precisely has led to equipment failures in the past." Webb stood. "Bottom line, Chen. Tonight you run your shift by the book. Follow every rule exactly. Don't experiment. Don't investigate. Just observe and document. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. Get some rest before your shift." I spent the hours before dinner reading the final sections of Peterson's notebook. His last weeks of entries showed a man becoming more meticulous, more careful. He'd started adding timestamps down to the second. He'd begun noting ambient details, the pitch of the ventilation hum, the exact pattern of frost formation, the way shadows fell across the equipment. One entry stood out. 5 days before his evacuation. 3:47 and 16 seconds, Secondary signal source appeared at 3.7 kilometers. Signal strength increasing. I can feel it in my teeth now, like the pressure has texture. Source appears to be moving upward. 3.4 kilometers. 3.1. It's approaching faster than any geological process could account for. 2.8. 2.6. I should radio Webb, but Rule 4 says don't isolate it, and calling attention to it feels like isolation. 2.3. That's the depth of the primary source. They're overlapping. The monitors show both signals now, identical waveforms, perfectly synchronized. 2.0, 1.7, it's still rising. 1.2, 0353 and 41 seconds. Signal source is now at 0.8 kilometers. That's less than half a mile below us. I can hear something in the drill access corridor. Not the ventilation sounds, something else, something moving. 354 and 18 seconds. Signal at 0.3 kilometers. It's directly below Module F. I'm calling Webb. I don't care if this breaks protocol. Something is wrong. That was where the entry ended before his final note about the evacuation. I closed the notebook. Whatever Peterson had experienced that night, he'd survived it. Webb had arrived, and by the time he did, the signal had returned to baseline. Peterson had gone to medical, been evaluated, and eventually sent home. But he'd documented one crucial fact. The signal source, or something like it, could move. And it could come close, very close. Dinner was subdued. Kowalski mentioned that some of the exterior temperature sensors were giving inconsistent readings. Tanaka reported clear skies forecasted for the next 48 hours, which was good for observations, but bad for insulation. Radiation cooling would drop exterior temperatures even lower. Reeves said he'd be doing radio maintenance during the day shift tomorrow, and the emergency channel might be briefly offline. Not during my shift, right? I asked. No. 900 to 1200. You'll be asleep. After dinner, I returned to my berth and tried to rest. Sleep came in fragments. I kept waking to check the time, afraid I'd oversleep despite having set 2 alarms. At 21:45, I gave up and got dressed. Thermal layers, 2 pairs of socks, the fleece pullover that Kowalski had recommended. I made my way to Module F. The monitoring bay was empty and dark except for the glow of the standby monitors. I turned on the overhead lights and began my pre-shift. Check every monitor station, every cable connection, every status light. Everything was green. Everything was nominal. At 2200, I locked the security door, tested it, logged it. 2200, security door locked and verified. SC beginning solo shift. I was alone. The first hour was routine. I logged at 2230 and 2300. Made coffee at 2315. Watched the signal pulse its regular rhythm, every 11 seconds, never varying. At midnight, I logged again. Temperature, 16.4 degrees. Signal strength, minus 42 decibels. All systems green. The frost on the observation window had grown back. Same branching pattern. Same delicate lines spreading from the bottom left corner. I watched it extend across the glass, beautiful and unsettling. At 0030, I logged. At 0100, the signal surged. The pressure in my sinuses was worse tonight. It felt like the air in the room was pushing against me from all directions. The monitors showed the signal strength climbing, settling into the elevated pattern. At 0104, the ventilation sounds started. They were louder than any previous night. Not just metallic settling, but something that sounded almost organic. A rhythmic scraping, north to south, moving through the ductwork with purpose. I stayed in my chair. Rule 3. Don't investigate. The sounds reached the south wall. They stopped. Silence for 10 seconds. Then they started again, moving back north to south, louder. This wasn't in Peterson's logs. The sounds always moved once and stopped. They didn't repeat. I checked the clock. 01:09. The sounds were still going, making a third pass through the ventilation system. I reached for the radio, then stopped. Was this an emergency? The sounds were louder than usual and repeating, but they were still just sounds. They weren't a threat, not yet. The third pass completed. Silence. I waited, counting seconds, 60 seconds, 90. At 01:11, the sounds finally stopped for good. I logged it carefully. 0100, signal surge nominal, but stronger than previous nights. 0104 to 0111, ventilation sounds per rule 3, significantly louder than baseline. 3 complete passes north to south. Anomaly noted for briefing. At 0130, I did my regular logging. The signal was dropping back toward baseline, but slower than usual. It was still elevated at 0200. The lights flickered right on schedule. I kept my hands away from the equipment, my eyes on the monitors. Through the stuttering light, I caught glimpses of my reflection in the observation window. It was turned to the side again. Not facing me. Facing the east wall. Facing the drill access door. I didn't look directly at the window. I kept my eyes on the monitors, counting the seconds. 45, 46, 47. The flickering stopped. I verified each monitor, all green. I logged the event. Only then did I glance at the window. My reflection was normal again. But on the east wall, the red alarm housing above the drill access door was dark. The alarm should always have a small green standby light. Now it was completely dark. I stared at it. The door itself looked normal, still closed, still locked. But the alarm was dead. Was this an equipment malfunction? Or something else? I checked the procedures manual on the desk. Alarm system failures were supposed to be reported to maintenance immediately. But the manual also said not to approach the drill access door for any reason during shift. I compromised. I radioed Channel 7. Monitoring bay to Webb. Non-emergency equipment issue. The drill access alarm light is out. Requesting guidance. Static. Then Webb's voice, thick with sleep. Alarm light only. Or the full system. Unknown. The status indicator above the door is completely dark. Can you verify the door is still locked without approaching it? Not from here. A pause. Stand by. I waited, watching the door from across the room. It didn't move. The handle didn't turn. Everything looked secure. Webb came back on. I'm checking the security logs. Stand by. Another minute passed. Then, logs show the alarm system offline since 0158. Maintenance failure, not a breach. The door is still electromagnetically locked from the main security system. Do not approach it. I'll have Kowalski check it during day shift. Continue your watch. Copy that. Continuing watch. I logged the exchange. 0209. Drill access alarm system offline. Reported to Webb. Advised door remains secured. No action required. At 0230, I logged the regular interval. The signal had finally returned to baseline levels. Temperature was 16.1 degrees. At 0300, I turned down the radio volume. The voices started almost immediately. Chen, can you hear me? This is Peterson. I went rigid. That wasn't Webb's voice. It was younger, tighter, strained. Chen, don't trust the readings. The signal is closer than they think. Check the drill access. I stared at the radio. The red transmission light was off. No one was broadcasting. This was Rule 9, not real. Don't respond. It came up through the drill hole. That's how it gets in. Please, check the door. The voice was desperate now, pleading. It sounded so real, so human, so afraid. I kept my hand away from the transmit button. Not real, just another anomaly. Peterson had heard voices during this window. So had Okonkwo. They were part of the pattern. Chen, please, it's right behind you. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the monitors, on the clock, counting the seconds until 03:30, when I could turn the volume back up and verify the radio was working correctly. The voice continued for another 2 minutes, then faded into static. At 03:30 exactly, I turned the volume back up and tested the emergency beacon. Green light, functioning correctly. I logged it. 0300 to 0330. Radio silence maintained per Rule 9. Voice anomalies present, consistent with documented pattern. Beacon test successful. My hands were shaking slightly as I wrote. The voice had sounded so convincing, so genuinely terrified. If I hadn't known the rule, if I hadn't been prepared, I might have responded. At 0400, I logged. At 0430, I stood for the equipment check. Primary signal monitor, green. I moved clockwise to the secondary array, green. Acoustic monitors, green. Seismic, green. Environmental, green. I completed the circuit and returned to my chair. As I sat down, I heard something, a sound from the drill access corridor. Not the ventilation sounds, something else. A single metallic clang, like something had struck the door from the other side. I looked at the door. It was still closed, still locked. The alarm housing was still dark. Silence. I waited, counting seconds. 30, 60, 90. Nothing else. Just that one sound. I logged it. 0434. Single impact sound from drill access corridor. Door remained secured. No follow-up sounds observed. At 0500, I logged the regular interval. At 0530, again. The night was almost over. Just 30 more minutes. At 0545, I began the end-of-shift checklist. Lock printouts in secure drawer. Clear desk. Monitors to standby. Pens in drawer. Log binder closed. At 0558, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside the security door. Someone was walking toward Module F. Heavy boots, steady pace. They stopped right outside the door. I waited for the knock. Okonkwo always knocked once at shift change. A signal that he was there. No knock came. The footsteps started again, walking away down the corridor. I looked at the clock. 0559. At 0600 exactly, I unlocked the security door and opened it. The corridor was empty. No one was there. I stepped out and looked both ways. Nothing. No sign of anyone. I logged the door unlock and stepped back inside to collect my notes. When I turned around, Okonkwo was walking down the corridor from the other direction, from Module A. "Morning," he said. "How was your first solo?" "Eventful. The alarm system's down on the drill access door. Webb knows." And I heard someone walking past at 0558. Okonkwo frowned. "What direction?" "Coming from Module A, walking toward the exterior." "That's impossible. I just came from Module A. There's only one corridor. I would have seen anyone ahead of me." We looked at each other. "Add it to your report," he finally said. "Webb will want to know." We walked back to Module A together. The sun was well up now, pale and cold on the horizon. Inside the module, the station was coming to life. I could smell coffee and something that might have been oatmeal cooking in the galley. Okonkwo stopped at the junction. You did well. First solo shift is always the hardest. It gets easier once you know what to expect. Does it? He smiled slightly. No, but you get better at managing it. In my berth, I typed up my incident report on my personal laptop, detailed the alarm failure, the repeated ventilation sounds, the voice anomaly, the impact on the drill access door, the phantom footsteps. I printed it out and sealed it in an envelope for Webb. Then I lay down and tried to sleep. I dreamed of figures walking on ice, of frost patterns spreading across glass, of a door that wouldn't stay locked. I dreamed of a voice calling my name from somewhere deep below, 2.3 kilometers down, where nothing human should be able to survive. I woke at 1400 to find another note under my door. Briefing at 1600. Bring your incident report. We need to discuss amendments to the rules. Webb. The briefing room was fuller than before. Webb sat at the head of the table. Deshmukh and Volkov were there, along with Kowalski and Reeves. Okonkwo sat across from me, his expression neutral. Webb opened a folder. I've reviewed your incident report and compared it to Peterson's logs. We're seeing pattern escalation. The ventilation sounds repeating, the alarm system failure, the voice anomalies becoming more specific. This matches Peterson's final 2 weeks before his incident. What does that mean? I asked. It means the signal is entering an active phase. We've observed this cycle 3 times since the station opened. Periods of baseline activity lasting 4 to 6 months, followed by 2 to 3 weeks of escalation, then a peak event, then return to baseline. Deshmukh added, Peterson's evacuation was during a peak event. So was Dr. Amundson's incident before him. We're better prepared now, but we need to update your operating procedures. Webb pulled out a document. Amendments to the core rules. These go into effect starting tonight. He read them aloud, and I copied them into Peterson's notebook on a blank page near the end. Amendment 1. If the ventilation sounds repeat more than once during the 0100 period, log each repetition with precise timing. If they repeat more than 3 times, radio channel 7 immediately. Do not wait until morning briefing. Amendment 2. If the drill access alarm system shows as offline, verify the status every 30 minutes. Note each verification in the log. If the alarm light returns to green, radio channel 7 immediately. If the door handle appears to move at any time, evacuate module F immediately and radio emergency. Amendment 3. During the 0300 radio silence window, the voice anomalies may use names of station personnel or former personnel. Do not respond regardless of what name is used or what information is requested. Do not acknowledge hearing your own name. Amendment 4. If you observe movement outside the observation window, note the time and position. If the figure approaches closer than 10 meters to the module, maintain continuous observation and log its movement. If it touches the window or attempts to manipulate the exterior door controls, radio channel 7 immediately. Amendment 5. The phantom footsteps in the corridor may occur between 0530 and 0600. If you hear footsteps, verify the time and direction. Do not open the security door to investigate. Wait until 0600 to exit as normal. If footsteps occur before 0530, radio channel 7 immediately. Amendment 6. If your reflection in the observation window appears to move independently, do not look directly at it. However, note its orientation in the log. If it appears to be looking at the drill access door, verify the door status and log this correlation. Amendment 7. All equipment checks must now be logged with completion times to the nearest minute. If any equipment check takes longer than 5 minutes to complete, note the delay and the reason in the log. Amendment 8. If the temperature in Module F drops below 10 degrees Celsius, follow cold weather protocols immediately. If the temperature rises above 20 degrees, evacuate and radio emergency. If the temperature fluctuates more than 3 degrees in any 30-minute period, note this in the log. Amendment 9. Secondary signal sources at depths different from the primary source must now be logged with exact bearings and depth measurements. If a secondary source appears to move more than 0.5 kilometers in less than 5 minutes, radio channel 7 immediately. Amendment 10. If you experience any of the following symptoms during your shift: severe headache, nausea, visual distortions, auditory hallucinations, not matching documented anomalies, feelings of being touched, or perception that the room geometry is wrong, radio channel 7 immediately and request relief. Webb looked up from the document. These amendments are based on Peterson's documented experiences and our analysis of the escalation pattern. They're designed to give you clearer guidance on when something is within normal parameters and when it requires immediate response. How long does the escalation phase typically last? I asked. Peterson's lasted 19 days. Amundsen's lasted 16. We're currently on day 4 of this phase. We expect another 10 to 15 days before the peak event. And then the signal returns to baseline and stays quiet for several months. We use that time to analyze data and prepare for the next cycle. Volkov spoke up. The good news is that no one's been seriously hurt during a peak event. Peterson and Amundsen both experienced psychological stress, but no physical harm. The signal seems to cause perceptual anomalies rather than direct danger. Seems to, I repeated. That's not reassuring. It's the best we can offer, Webb said. We don't fully understand the mechanism. We know it affects electronics. We know it seems to influence perception. We know it follows predictable patterns. Beyond that, we're learning as we go. Kowalski cleared his throat. I checked the drill access alarm. The circuit breaker had tripped. No sign of tampering. No sign of malfunction. I reset it and tested the system. It's working normally now. Circuits don't trip themselves, I said. No. But we're dealing with equipment in extreme conditions and proximity to an unknown signal source. Sometimes things just fail. Reeves added, I'm upgrading the radio monitoring system. If we get any actual transmissions during the silence window, the system will flag them. That should help you distinguish between real calls and anomalies. Webb stood. Chen, you'll continue your regular shift schedule. We're not pulling you off duty. That would leave us short-handed and wouldn't solve anything. But we'll have someone on standby in Module A every night, ready to respond if you need backup. Usually that'll be Okonkwo or me. What about Peterson? Is he still in medical? He's home in New Zealand, recovering well. He's been debriefed, and he's provided consultation on these amendments. He specifically wanted me to tell you, trust the rules, document everything, and don't try to be brave. If something scares you, call for help. The meeting ended. I went to the galley for early dinner, but I could only manage half my portion. My stomach was tight with anticipation and fear. Tanaka sat down next to me. First week is always the worst. You're doing fine. How can you tell? You're still here. You're still going to your shifts. Peterson started requesting schedule changes by his 3rd week in escalation. You're steadier than he was. Or I'm better at hiding my fear. That works too. After dinner, I laid down in my berth but couldn't sleep. I reviewed the amended rules, memorizing the new thresholds and response protocols. At 2100, I got dressed and headed for Module F early. The monitoring bay felt different tonight, more confined. The shadows in the corners seemed darker. I ran through my pre-shift check with extra care, testing each system twice. At 2200, I locked the security door. At 2230, I logged. Temperature, 16.6 degrees. Signal strength, minus 41 decibels. All systems green. The frost pattern on the observation window was already forming, spreading from the bottom left corner in those same branching lines. I watched it grow, more extensive than previous nights, covering 3/4 of the window by 0030. At 0100, the signal surged. The pressure in my sinuses was immediate and intense. The monitors showed signal strength climbing higher than I'd seen before. At 0103, the ventilation sound started. First pass, north to south. Louder than last night. At 0108, the second pass. At 0113, the third pass. I prepared to radio if there was a fourth. Amendment 1. Radio immediately, if more than 3 repetitions. At 0115, silence. 3 passes total, within parameters. I logged it, carefully. 0100, signal surge, strength exceeds previous baseline. 0103 to 0115, ventilation sounds, 3 complete passes, increasing volume. Per Amendment 1, below threshold for immediate radio. At 0130, I logged the regular interval. The signal was remaining elevated longer than usual. At 0200, it still hadn't dropped back to baseline. The lights flickered. I kept my hands on the desk, my eyes on the monitors. Through the stuttering light, I saw my reflection in the observation window. It was turned toward the drill access door again. The flickering continued. 51 seconds this time, longer than ever before. When it stopped, I verified each monitor. All green. I glanced at the window. My reflection was normal, but I noted the correlation in my log. 0200, light flicker, duration 51 seconds. Per Amendment 6, reflection oriented toward drill access door during event. I stood and checked the drill access door. The alarm light was green. The door was secure. I verified this from 15 feet away, following my instinct not to approach it directly. At 0230, I logged. The signal was finally dropping back toward baseline. Temperature was holding steady at 16.4 degrees. At 0300, I turned down the radio volume. The voice started immediately. "Chen, this is Peterson. I need you to listen carefully." I kept my hand away from the transmit button. Amendment 3. Don't respond, regardless of names used. The signal isn't what they think it is. It's not geological. It's not even electromagnetic in the way we understand. It's something else. The voice was so clear tonight, so rational. Not desperate or afraid like last night, just matter of fact, informative. It's aware. It knows we're here. It's been trying to communicate, but we keep treating it like a natural phenomenon. "Chen, you need to tell Webb." I watched the clock. 0303, 0304, 26 more minutes of this. The rules aren't protection, they're accommodation. We're not keeping it out. We're learning to coexist with it. Do you understand the difference? 0308. The voice continued, patient and insistent. It came up through the drill hole 18 months ago, not physically. But something did come up, and now it's here. In the ice, in the equipment, in the spaces between things. 03:15, halfway through the window. Peterson didn't evacuate because he was scared. He evacuated because he understood, and understanding it is worse than fearing it. 03:21. The voice was starting to fade. When the peak event comes, you'll have a choice. You can follow the rules and survive, or you can break them and learn. Peterson chose survival. I don't know what you'll choose. 03:30. Silence. I turned the radio volume back up and tested the emergency beacon. Green light, functioning correctly. I logged it, my hand cramping from writing too fast. 0300 to 0330. Radio silence maintained per Amendment 3. Voice anomaly using Peterson's identity. Content more elaborate than previous nights. No response made. At 0400, I logged the regular interval. At 0430, I stood for the equipment check. Primary monitor, green. Secondary array. I paused. One of the screens showed a secondary signal source. Depth, 1.7 kilometers. Bearing, 217 degrees. Same as the primary source, but much shallower. I checked my watch. 0432. I completed the equipment check, moving clockwise, then returned to my chair to log the secondary source. 0432. Secondary signal source detected. Depth 1.7 kilometers, bearing 217 degrees. Per Amendment 9, monitoring for movement. I watched the display. The secondary source held steady for 2 minutes. Then it shifted. Depth 1.4 kilometers. My heart rate increased. That was 0.3 kilometers of movement in less than 3 minutes. Still below the 0.5 threshold, but getting close. At 0438, it shifted again. Depth 1.1 kilometers. The secondary source was rising through the ice, heading toward the surface, heading toward us. I calculated the movement rate, roughly 0.1 kilometers per minute. If it maintained that rate, it would reach station depth in approximately 11 minutes. Did that constitute a threshold requiring immediate radio? Amendment 9 said to radio if movement exceeded 0.5 kilometers in less than 5 minutes. This was 0.6 kilometers in 6 minutes. Close, but technically not meeting the threshold yet. I decided to wait and monitor. If the movement accelerated, I'd radio immediately. At 0440, the secondary source was at 0.9 kilometers depth. At 0442, 0.7 kilometers. At 0444, 0.5 kilometers. It was accelerating, now moving 0.2 kilometers every 2 minutes, well above the threshold. I reached for the radio. Before I could key the mic, I heard something. A sound from the drill access corridor. Not a single impact this time. Multiple sounds. Rhythmic, like footsteps. Something was walking in the drill access corridor. I stared at the door. It remained closed. The alarm light was green, but I could hear the footsteps clearly, getting closer. The secondary signal source was now at 0.3 kilometers depth. The footsteps stopped directly outside the drill access door. I keyed the radio. Monitoring bay to web. Per Amendment 9, secondary source movement exceeds threshold. Currently at 0.3 kilometers and approaching. Also hearing anomalous sounds from drill access corridor. Request guidance. Static. Then Webb's voice, clear and alert. Copy that. I'm reviewing the security logs now. Stand by. Do not approach the drill access door. Copy. Standing by. I watched the monitors. The secondary source continued rising. 0.2 kilometers. 0.1 kilometers. The footsteps in the corridor moved away from the door, receding into distance, then fading entirely. Webb came back on. Security logs show no breach. The drill access door has remained locked. Electromagnetic seal is holding. Whatever you're hearing isn't someone in the corridor. Understood. The secondary source is now at 0.08 kilometers. A pause. Less than 300 feet below you. Chen, I want you to maintain your position and continue logging. Okonkwo is suiting up. He'll be there in 5 minutes. If the source reaches station depth, or if the drill access door shows any sign of opening, evacuate immediately to Module A. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. Maintaining position and logging. At 0448, the secondary source reached 0.05 kilometers, less than 200 feet of ice between it and Module F. The temperature in the monitoring bay dropped. I watched the environmental monitor show 16.4 degrees, then 16.1, then 15.7. At 0450, the secondary source stopped rising. It held at 0.04 kilometers depth. The temperature stabilized at 15.3 degrees, still above the 10-degree threshold for cold weather protocols. But the sudden drop was concerning. I logged everything with precise timestamps. The movement of the signal source, the temperature change, the sounds in the corridor, Webb's guidance. At 0453, Okonkwo's voice came through the radio. Chen, I'm outside the security door. Unlocking now. The lock clicked. The door opened. Okonkwo stepped through, already scanning the monitors. Show me the secondary source. I pointed to the display. The signal source was still holding at 0.04 kilometers. Its waveform perfectly synchronized with the primary source at 2.3 kilometers depth. Two sources, same frequency, same pulse rate, Okonkwo said quietly. That's new. Should I be somewhere else? No. Webb wants continuous observation. I'm here as backup. He checked the drill access door, verified the alarm was green, then sat in the secondary chair. You continue the regular logging schedule. I'll monitor the signal sources. At 0500, I logged. Temperature had crept back up to 15.9 degrees. The secondary source remained at 0.04 kilometers. At 0530, I logged again. No change. The sun was starting to show on the horizon now, pale light filtering through the frost-covered observation window. The branching patterns looked different in daylight, less organic, more geometric. At 0543, the secondary source began descending. 0.06 kilometers, 0.1, 0.3. It was moving back down through the ice at the same rate it had risen, steady and purposeful. It's retreating, I said. Okonkwo nodded. Log the descent. Note any correlation with other events. At 0545, I began the end-of-shift checklist while watching the monitors. The secondary source continued descending. 0.8 kilometers, 1.2, 1.6. By 0558, it had returned to 2.3 kilometers depth, exactly matching the primary source. Then both waveforms merged into a single signal, indistinguishable from baseline. At 0600, I unlocked the security door. The corridor outside was empty and normal. No phantom footsteps, no strange sounds. Webb was waiting in Module A with Deshmukh. They took my logs and Okonkwo's notes immediately. Go rest, Webb said. We'll analyze this and brief you at 1600. In my berth, I tried to process what I'd witnessed, a signal source rising through nearly 2 kilometers of solid ice in less than 15 minutes. Temperature changes correlating with its proximity, sounds in a sealed corridor, and then a retreat, as if something had come close to investigate and then decided to return to depth. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, eyes open, watching the ceiling. At 1400, I gave up and went to the galley. Tanaka was there, eating a late lunch. "Heard you had an exciting shift," she said. "News travels fast." Small station. Webb's been in the data room with Deshmukh all morning. They only do that when something significant happens. She studied my face. "You holding up okay?" "I don't know. I keep asking myself what I'm actually observing down there. Is it a natural phenomenon we don't understand? Is it something else? Does the answer change what you do? Maybe. If it's natural, the rules are just safety procedures. If it's something else, then the rules are something else too," Tanaka finished. Peterson struggled with that question, spent his last month trying to figure out if he was documenting a discovery or negotiating with something intelligent. "What do you think?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think the signal has been here for a very long time, probably long before we drilled down to it. I think our presence activated something, or maybe just made us aware of something that was always active. And I think the rules keep us safe regardless of what the signal actually is. So I follow them." "That's not really an answer." "No, but it's how I sleep at night." The 1600 briefing included the full station crew. Webb had printed charts showing the signal source movement, overlaid with temperature data, and my logged observations. "This is the most dramatic event we've recorded," he said. "The secondary source came within 130 feet of Module F before retreating. We've never observed movement of this magnitude before." Deshmukh added, "The synchronization between the primary and secondary sources is also new. They're not just similar, they're identical. Same frequency, same phase, same amplitude. It's as if they're two manifestations of the same phenomenon. Or the same thing appearing in two places," Volkov said quietly. Webb shot her a look, but didn't contradict her. "Regardless of interpretation, we need additional protocols. These are emergency procedures, only to be used during extreme events like what happened this morning." He distributed a new document. I copied it into the notebook. Emergency Protocol 1. If a secondary signal source approaches within 0.1 kilometers of station depth, all personnel except the monitoring bay operator must evacuate to Module A. The operator maintains observation, but must be prepared for immediate evacuation if directed. Emergency Protocol 2. If temperature in Module F drops below 12 degrees Celsius while a secondary source is present, this indicates dangerous proximity. Evacuate immediately and seal Module F from the main complex. Emergency Protocol 3. If sounds are heard from the drill access corridor while a secondary source is approaching, do not investigate under any circumstances. Maintain distance of at least 15 feet from the drill access door. If the alarm system fails while sounds are present, evacuate immediately. Emergency Protocol 4. If the secondary source reaches station depth, 0.00 kilometers, evacuate Module F immediately. Do not attempt to continue observation. Seal the module and retreat to Module A. Resume monitoring only after the source has descended below 0.5 kilometers. Emergency Protocol 5. During peak events, the monitoring bay operator will have a dedicated backup in Module A at all times. The backup must be suited and ready to reach Module F within 3 minutes of a radio call. Webb looked at me directly. These protocols supersede the amendment rules during extreme events. Your safety is more important than data collection. Understood? Understood. Good. You're off shift tonight. Okonkwo will cover. You'll resume tomorrow night. Use the time to rest and process what you experienced. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt oddly guilty, like I was abandoning my post. That night, I couldn't stay away from the monitoring bay. At 2300, I found myself in the corridor outside Module F, listening. I could hear Okonkwo moving around inside, the regular sounds of equipment checks and logging procedures. Everything was normal, routine. I went back to my berth and tried to sleep. I dreamed of something vast moving through ice, not breaking it, but passing through it like water, rising toward a surface it couldn't cross, but could touch. The next day passed slowly. I reviewed my logs, read more of Peterson's notebook, tried to understand the pattern. At dinner, Kowalski mentioned that 2 more exterior sensors had failed. Reeves said the radio system was showing odd interference on channels other than 7. Escalation phase, Webb said simply. Equipment stress increases during these periods. We budget for component replacement. At 21:45, I suited up for my shift. Okonkwo met me outside Module F. Last night was quiet, he said. Signals stayed at baseline, no secondary sources. The frost pattern was lighter, might be the start of de-escalation. Or the calm before something worse. Possible, but I prefer optimism when I can manage it. He handed me a radio. Webb wants you to carry a backup. Keep it on channel 8. If channel 7 fails, switch to 8 immediately. I clipped it to my belt alongside the primary radio. At 2200, I locked the security door and began my shift alone. The first hour was indeed quiet. No unusual frost patterns. Regular ventilation sounds at 0100, a single pass, lasting until 0114, exactly as the original rules specified. The lights flickered at 0200 for 36 seconds. My reflection stayed normal. At 0300, I maintained radio silence. The voice anomalies were fainter tonight, harder to distinguish from static. At 0430, I did the equipment check. All systems green, no secondary sources. At 0500, I logged with a sense of relief. Maybe Okonkwo was right. Maybe the escalation was ending. At 0532, the temperature dropped, 15 degrees, 14.5, 14. I checked the environmental monitor. The heating system was functioning correctly, but the temperature continued falling. 13.5 degrees. 13. I grabbed the radio. Monitoring bay to Webb, temperature dropping rapidly, currently at 13 degrees and falling. No secondary source visible on monitors. Copy. Maintain observation. Suit up if it drops below 12. I went to the supply cabinet and pulled out the emergency parka. The temperature was at 12.8 degrees. I put on the parka and returned to the monitors. 12.3 degrees. 12. The monitors suddenly showed a secondary source, but not rising from depth. This one appeared at 0.2 kilometers, as if it had simply materialized there. 11.8 degrees. Webb, secondary source present at 0.2 kilometers. Temperature now 11.8, approaching threshold. Copy. Okonkwo is en route. Maintain observation unless it drops below 10. 11.5 degrees. The secondary source moved upward. 0.15 kilometers. 0.1. 0.05. 11 degrees. Webb at threshold. Source is at 0.05 kilometers. Evacuate now. Chen, get out of Module F. I grabbed my logs and headed for the security door. As I reached for the lock, I heard it. A sound from the drill access corridor. Not footsteps this time. A voice. "Sarah." My name, spoken clearly, not over the radio, from behind the drill access door. "Sarah, open the door." It sounded like my mother. Exactly like my mother, who is 6,000 miles away in California. "Sarah, I need you to open the door. Please." I backed away from the security door, away from the drill access door, until I was pressed against the observation window. The temperature was 10.8 degrees. The secondary source was at 0.03 kilometers. "Sarah, don't leave me down here. It's cold. I've been waiting so long." Amendment 3. Don't respond to voices using names. Don't acknowledge hearing your own name. But this wasn't during radio silence. This was a voice in the corridor. "Sarah, please. I'm scared. Open the door." My hand was on the security door lock. I could leave. I should leave. Webb had ordered evacuation. But what if it really was my mother somehow? What if the impossible had happened and she was down here in the drill access corridor, trapped and afraid? "Sarah, it's so dark. I can't find my way out. Help me." 10.6 degrees. The security door lock clicked. Okonkwo burst through, suited in full Arctic gear. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the exit. "Don't listen," he said. "It's not real. Come on." "But it sounds..." "It's not real. Move." He pulled me through the door into the corridor. Behind us, the voice from the drill access corridor changed. It was laughing. My mother's laugh, but wrong. Too deep. Too resonant. Okonkwo sealed the Module F security door from the outside and marked it with red tape. "No one goes in until the temperature normalizes." We retreated to Module A. Webb was in the briefing room with emergency protocols spread across the table. "Secondary source?" he asked. 0.03 kilometers when we evacuated," I said. My voice was shaking. "Temperature?" 10.6 and falling." He checked his monitors. "It's at 9.2 now. The source is at 0.02 kilometers." He looked at me. "You heard something in the drill access corridor." It wasn't a question. A voice, using my mother's voice, telling me to open the door. "And you didn't open it." Okonkwo arrived before I could decide. Webb's expression was unreadable. The rule is clear. Don't respond to voices using names. That includes voices that aren't coming through the radio. It's not explicitly in the rules. Then we'll make it explicit. He pulled out a pen. Amendment 11. Any voice heard from the drill access corridor is not real, regardless of who it claims to be or how familiar it sounds. Do not respond. Do not open the door. Do not investigate. Evacuate and report immediately. He wrote it in block letters on a new page and handed it to me. Add this to your rule set. Memorize it. At 0630, the temperature in Module F stabilized at 8.4 degrees. The secondary source had descended to 0.9 kilometers. At 0700, the temperature began rising. By 0800, it was back to 14 degrees. The heating system was working overtime, but the module was recovering. By 0900, the secondary source had returned to 2.3 kilometers depth and merged with the primary signal. Webb unsealed Module F. Kowalski went in to check for damage. He found none, just ice formations on the interior walls and frost covering every surface. Everything's intact, he reported. Just cold. Give it 3 hours to warm up properly. I sat in the briefing room, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to think about my mother's voice coming from behind that door, trying not to wonder what I would have seen if I'd opened it. Okonkwo sat across from me. "You did well. You followed protocols even when it was hard." "I almost didn't." "Almost doesn't matter. You didn't open the door. That's what counts." "How do you do this? How do you work shift after shift knowing that something is down there trying to trick you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think of it as trying. I think of it as just doing what it does, like how wind pushes on buildings, or how ice shifts under pressure. The signal creates these effects. They feel personal because they use personal information, but I don't believe there's malice in it, just interaction." That voice knew my mother's voice. It had access to your mind, your memories. During periods of high signal strength, the electromagnetic effects can influence neural activity. You were thinking about your mother, maybe unconsciously, and the signal reflected that back to you through whatever mechanism creates the voice phenomena. You make it sound so rational. I have to. The alternative is believing something intelligent is down there, deliberately trying to lure us into breaking safety protocols. That's a harder truth to live with. What if it's both? What if it's a natural phenomenon that's also somehow aware? Then the rules still work, and that's all that matters. At 1400, Webb called another briefing. "We're 11 days into escalation. Based on previous cycles, we expect another 3 to 7 days before the peak event. After that, the signal should return to baseline and remain quiet for 4 to 6 months. "What happens during the peak event?" I asked. "Based on Peterson and Amundsen's experiences, increased secondary source activity, more frequent voice anomalies, possible equipment failures, and perceptual distortions. Both previous operators reported feeling like the monitoring bay was larger or smaller than normal, like distances were wrong. Both reported seeing things outside the observation window that shouldn't exist at this latitude." "What kind of things?" "Trees, buildings, people they knew, landscapes from their childhood." Webb's tone was matter of fact. "The signal appears to access memory and project it somehow. We don't understand the mechanism." "How do we get through it?" "Same way you've gotten through everything so far. Follow the rules, document what you observe. Radio for help when you need it. Trust your training." Deshmukh added, "We'll have emergency protocols active. Okonkwo will be suited up and ready in Module A during your entire shift. I'll be monitoring the signal remotely. Webb will be coordinating responses. You won't be alone." "I feel alone in that room." "I know," Webb said, "but you're not." That night, I was scheduled off shift again. Okonkwo would cover. I tried to rest, tried to read, tried to distract myself. Nothing worked. At 0200, I heard raised voices from the radio room. I pulled on clothes and went to investigate. Webb was there with Reeves, both of them staring at the radio equipment. "Not possible," Reeves was saying. "Channel 7 is hardwired to the emergency frequency. It can't broadcast anything else." "Then explain what I just heard," Webb said. He saw me in the doorway. "Chen, you're not supposed to be awake." "I heard voices. What's happening?" Webb hesitated, then gestured me in. "Okonkwo radioed an emergency 10 minutes ago. Said the voice anomalies during radio silence weren't using Peterson's voice or any other recorded personnel. They were using your voice." My skin went cold. "My voice saying what?" "Telling him to let you into Module F. Saying you were outside the security door and needed help. He verified you were in your berth, called me to check. You were asleep. but the voice on Channel 7 kept insisting you were outside and in danger. How is that possible? It's not, Reeves said. The radio silence anomalies have always been playback style, distorted, fragmented. This was real-time, responsive. When Okonkwo didn't respond, your voice, or whatever was imitating it, got more urgent, more specific. Webb looked at me. How much does the signal know about you? I don't understand. Your memories, your fears, your relationships. How much has it accessed? I thought about my mother's voice from the drill access corridor. I don't know. How do I even measure that? You can't. But the fact that it's now imitating active personnel, not just using recorded voices or names, suggests the escalation is entering a new phase. One we haven't seen before. Meaning the next few days are going to be worse than Peterson's peak event. We need to be prepared for phenomena outside our documented experience. At 0600, Okonkwo returned from his shift. His face was drawn, exhausted. The voice, he said to me. It had your cadence, your speech patterns. If I hadn't verified your location, I would have believed it was you. I'm sorry. Not your fault, but we need a new protocol, some way to verify identity during these events. Webb pulled out his notepad. Challenge response system. Each person gets a code phrase known only to them and me. If there's doubt about someone's identity, I verify with the code phrase. He assigned phrases. Mine was Canberra District. Arbitrary, meaningless, impossible for the signal to guess unless it could literally read my mind in real time. Starting tonight, any communication that seems suspicious gets challenged, Webb said. We don't take chances with identity anymore. The next 3 nights followed a similar pattern. I worked my shifts while the signal escalated. Secondary sources appeared and retreated. Temperatures fluctuated. Voice anomalies became more sophisticated, more personal. On the 13th night of escalation, the voice in the drill access corridor was my father. On the 14th, it was my best friend from graduate school. On the 15th, it was Peterson himself, describing what he'd seen during his peak event in horrifying detail. I followed the rules. I logged everything. I didn't respond. I didn't open doors. I radioed when thresholds were exceeded. But each night took something from me. Sleep became difficult. Food tasted like ash. I found myself checking mirrors to make sure my reflection was doing what it should. I counted my steps obsessively when walking corridors, making sure distances stayed consistent. On the 16th night, Webb pulled me aside before my shift. We think tonight might be the peak. All indicators are at maximum. Deschmuck's models predict a major event between 0200 and 0400. What should I do differently? Nothing. Same protocols, same procedures. But Chen, if it gets to be too much, if you feel like you're losing your grip on what's real, evacuate. Your mental health is more important than data. Peterson made it through his peak event. Peterson was hospitalized for 3 weeks after. He's still in therapy. There's no shame in calling it. I'll be fine, but I wasn't sure I believed it. At 2200, I locked myself into Module F and began the shift. The monitoring bay felt different tonight. The angles seemed slightly wrong, the corners not quite 90 degrees. I told myself it was stress, fatigue, fear, not real distortion. At 0100, the signal surged higher than I'd ever seen. The pressure in my sinuses felt like it would crack my skull. 3 secondary sources appeared simultaneously at different depths, all rising toward the station. The ventilation sounds didn't just repeat. They harmonized, 3 different patterns moving through the ductwork in counterpoint. I logged it all. Temperature, 15.1 degrees. 3 secondary sources at 0.8, 1.3, and 1.9 kilometers respectively. At 0130, the sources were at 0.5, 0.9, and 1.4 kilometers, all rising steadily. At 0200, the lights didn't just flicker. They went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the monitoring bay in red. The monitors stayed on, running on backup power. In the red light, I saw my reflection in the observation window. It was standing up, though I was still seated. It was facing me directly, watching me. I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes on the monitors. The 3 secondary sources were at 0.2, 0.5, and 0.8 kilometers. Temperature, 13.4 degrees. Monitoring bay to web. We have peak event conditions, 3 sources, approaching, temperature dropping, emergency lighting active, static, then. Copy. Okonkwo is suiting up. Continue observation unless temperature hits 10 degrees or any source reaches 0.1 kilometers. Copy. At 0215, the temperature was 11.9 degrees. The 3 sources were at 0.1, 0.3, and 0.5 kilometers. The drill access door alarm light went dark. Something hit the door from the other side. Once, twice, 3 times. Rhythmic, purposeful. Web, drill access alarm is dark. Something is impacting the door. Multiple sources now at critical depths. Evacuate. Chen, get out now. I grabbed my logs and headed for the security door. As I reached for the lock, the observation window cracked, not shattered, just a single fracture line running diagonally across the glass, through the frost patterns. Through the fracture, I could see outside clearly for the first time. There were 3 figures standing on the ice. One looked like my mother. One looked like Peterson. One looked like me. They were all facing the window. They were all absolutely motionless. Chen, report. Webb's voice was urgent on the radio. The window cracked. There are figures outside. Webb, they look like people from my memories. They're not real. Get out of Module F. I unlocked the security door just as Okonkwo burst through from the other side. He grabbed my arm, and we ran down the corridor toward Module A. Behind us, I heard something that might have been the drill access door opening, or might have been the observation window finally shattering, or might have been something else entirely. We made it to Module A and sealed the pressure door. Webb was there, along with Deshmukh and Volkov. Module F status. Compromised, Okonkwo said. Window cracked. Drill access alarm failed. Temperature was dropping below 11 degrees when we evacuated. Webb checked his remote monitors. Temperature is at 8.4 now. All 3 sources have reached 0.02 kilometers. That's less than 70 feet below the module. What happens if they breach the surface? I asked. No one answered. We waited, watched the monitors. The 3 signal sources held position just below Module F for 17 minutes. The temperature in the monitoring bay dropped to 6.1 degrees before stabilizing. At 0300, the sources began descending. Slowly at first, then faster. By 0330, they were back below 1 kilometer depth. By 0400, they'd merged back with the primary source at 2.3 kilometers. The temperature in Module F began rising. At 0500, it was 14 degrees. At 0600, 16 degrees. Webb sent Kowalski to inspect the module. He returned 15 minutes later. Observation window has a single crack, but is still pressure sealed. Drill access door remained locked throughout. The alarm just failed. Door never opened. Heavy, frost on all interior surfaces. No other damage. The figures outside? I asked. Nothing there. Fresh snow, no tracks, no disturbance. Webb looked at me. How are you feeling? Like I saw something impossible. You saw what the signal wanted you to see. Memory projections, perceptual manipulation. Not real. It felt real. I know, that's why we have rules. Because feelings lie during these events. He was right, of course. But I couldn't shake the image of those three figures standing on the ice. My mother, Peterson, myself, all watching, all waiting. At 0800, Deschmuch confirmed that the signal had returned to baseline levels. The peak event is over. We should see declining activity now, returning to calm phase over the next week. And he was right. The next night, my shift was quiet. One ventilation pass, normal light flicker, no voice anomalies, no secondary sources, no figures outside. The night after that, even quieter. By the 20th night of what should have been escalation, the signal was behaving exactly as it had during my first week. Regular pulses every 11 seconds, predictable surge at 0100, all the anomalies occurring on schedule and within normal parameters. The station settled back into routine. Kowalski repaired the observation window. Reeves replaced the drill access alarm system. Webb updated the protocol documents with everything we'd learned during the escalation. On my 25th night of shifts, I sat in the monitoring bay and realized I was no longer afraid. I knew what to expect. I knew how to respond. The rules had become second nature. At 0200, the lights flickered for 34 seconds. I didn't flinch. At 0300, I heard faint voices on the radio during silence window. I didn't respond. At 0430, I walked my clockwise equipment check without thinking about the direction. The rules worked. They kept me safe. They gave structure to the incomprehensible. On my 30th night, Webb visited me before my shift. Peterson's replacement is arriving next week. Dr. Sarah Chen will train him for 3 days. Then you'll rotate back to research duties. Someone else will take the monitoring bay. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something like loss. I'd like to stage the rotation, I said. Webb studied me. Most operators burn out after 3 months. You've done 6 weeks through an escalation cycle. That's more than enough. I want to see the next cycle. I want to understand the pattern better. Understanding it doesn't change it. No, but there's something here, something important. And I don't think we're done learning from it. He was quiet for a moment. Peterson said something similar. Right before his peak event, he said the signal was trying to teach us something. That the rules weren't protection. They were communication protocols. Do you believe that? I don't know what I believe, but I know the rules work. I know they keep people alive. That's enough for me. It's not enough for me. Webb nodded slowly. Then you'll stay on rotation. But Chen, the moment it becomes too much, the moment you start thinking the rules don't matter, or that you can learn more by breaking them, you tell me. That's the line. That's when operators become dangerous. I understand. Good. Now go run your shift. At 2200, I locked the security door and settled into the monitoring bay alone. The familiar hum of equipment, the regular pulse of the signal, the frost beginning to form on the observation window in those same branching patterns. I pulled out Peterson's notebook and turned to the last blank page, started a new entry. Night 31, Dr. Sarah Chen, signal at baseline, all systems nominal. I've been thinking about what Peterson wrote regarding communication protocols. He was right that we're not keeping something out. We're learning to coexist with something that was here long before us. The rules aren't arbitrary. They're the vocabulary of that coexistence. Each one maps to something about how the signal interacts with human consciousness, human perception, human fear. I paused, considering my next words carefully. The question isn't whether the signal is intelligent. The question is whether intelligence is the right framework for understanding it. Maybe it's something that exists between intelligence and natural force. Maybe it doesn't have intention, but it has pattern. And we're learning to read that pattern through procedures that look like superstition, but are actually sophisticated behavioral protocols developed through systematic observation. I looked up at the monitors. The signal pulsed, regular and eternal. The figures I saw during the peak event weren't trying to lure me or harm me. They were the signal showing me what it had access to: memories, fears, self-image, demonstrating its reach. The voices weren't lies. They were echoes. The temperature changes, the secondary sources, the sounds in the corridor. All of it was the signal moving through its natural cycle, and we just happened to be close enough to observe it. I put down my pen. At 0100, the signal would surge. At 0104, I'd hear the ventilation sounds. At 0200, the lights would flicker. And I would follow the rules, because the rules were how humans survived in proximity to something vast and strange and utterly indifferent to our presence. At 0530, I would complete my shift. At 0600, I would unlock the door and step out into the corridor, back to the temporary safety of distance and daylight. And tomorrow night, I would return. Because someone had to watch, someone had to log, someone had to maintain the protocols that kept this precarious coexistence stable. The notebook lay open on the desk. Peterson's handwriting filled the early pages. My handwriting filled the later ones. And blank pages remained for whoever came next, whoever would add their observations to this growing record of how to live beside the impossible. Through the observation window, I caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness. Just a shape, distant and unclear. It could have been blowing snow. It could have been shadows. It could have been something else. I noted the time in the log. I described what I'd seen without interpretation. I continued my watch. The signal pulsed, every 11 seconds. Never varying, eternal and patient and unknowable. And I sat in the red glow of the monitoring bay, following the rules, documenting the pattern, learning the vocabulary of coexistence one shift at a time. Because down here, beneath the ice, beside the signal, the rules weren't just survival, they were conversation, and I wasn't ready to stop listening yet.